So welcome, Zamu. Thank you for joining us
Thank you.
today. And we'll just jump straight into it with your story. You can tell us a little bit about yourself. Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be having this conversation with you. My name is Zamokuhle Masondo, and I'm a mental health activist. So I'm the founder of an organization called Dark Cloud Above Me. And I think that for me, I started this organization because of my experience, living with depression and surviving suicide, So I am a suicide survivor, and my experience made me want to reach out and help other people. It made me recognize how important of an issue mental health is. And that is what inspired me to start Dark Cloud Above Me. So I am a college dropout. I think that my story with depression starts back then. I dropped out of college in my fourth year. I was studying theology back then. I was starting to become a pastor. It was a lifelong dream for me, and for my family and for generations. I was like, okay, this is the first pastor to come out of our family. And I think that for the longest time in my life, I knew nothing about depression, or mental illness. It had never happened to me. I didn't know it existed. And I think that's why I also decided to create awareness to Dark Cloud Above Me, because when I went through my depression, it was difficult for me to cope and overcome because I didn't know and understand what it is I was going through, And so part of the work we do is so that people who go through depression, or any other type of mental illness can understand that this is something that exists, and that when they go through it, they not feel as if they are going through something foreign, because I think for me, when I was depressed, I thought perhaps I was bewitched, I thought it was jealousy. I thought it was God punishing me for my sins. I thought I was crazy. It was all these things that made it difficult. And I think those are the things that led to, suicide, me attempting suicide, because I didn't understand what it is. And even the people around me did not, and I think that's why there's a big need for awareness, and yeah, I think my biggest pain, what led me to depression at the time, I think my biggest pain throughout my life has been childhood trauma, you'll find that with mental illness, most of what people go through and what they suffer from is from things that stem from their childhood that they haven't dealt with, as adults. And so it's important to really deal with the things that affected you as a child, to recognize them and to say, this is what happened and this is how it affected me. I experienced childhood trauma because I grew up in a household where I witnessed abuse.
So Zamu, you mentioned not having awareness of mental health, and I think that's a really important part to touch on, because I think a lot of people don't have awareness of mental health. Like, when I speak to people, they talk about how they talk about mental illness more than mental health. And a lot of people don't actually recognize that mental health is something that we all have. It's something that we all share. And just like how we take care of our physical health is how we take care of our mental health, So, and it's something that's important. It contributes to our overall idea of health and wellness. So I think it's very important what you spoke about in terms of awareness, because I think that's something we don't sort of consider enough. It's something that we only sort of talk about mental health in regards to mental illness now when somebody is really unwell and they really need help. And I think that's how the stigma then becomes attached to it, because somebody then looks at somebody who's unwell and they go, but if I'm not like that, if I'm not that unwell, then it means I should be fine. And that's not true. And when you talk about trauma and how something that can happen so early on in life is something that you carry with you and can at a later stage in your life come out as something that really affects your mental health in that way. And that's also something to consider, and that's also something that's very important, because we don't attach those two things. It's almost like whatever happens in the past, and we don't then talk about it further or sort of deal with it because it's like, but that's gone. And yeah, I think that's really important. So you were talking about trauma and saying that that is something that sits in that space for you with your mental health becoming unwell.
Yes, I was talking about trauma, but before I get to trauma, I also want to comment on, the comments you made on what I just said. I think that it is important, like you said, people talk about mental illness and not about mental health, and I think that's what both our organizations have in common, is that we are pro mental health,
Yeah.
while also being there to support those who are mentally unwell. I think that that's what I notice a lot about the work you do, and the
Yeah.
services you offer, that there are services that are about promoting your mental health, about, taking care of your mental well-being, and I think that's why many people should take advantage of these services that we offer, these workshops that we do. We do it because we want people to be mentally well. It's not just about you battling a particular mental illness, but it means just being proactive, about taking care of your mental health, and taking measures. And then to come to the trauma, yeah, I think that the trauma for me, um, I grew up, like I said, in a home where there was domestic violence. I think that I was very young. I'm sure, I think I was probably 7, the first time I witnessed abuse within the home. I think life was perfect before then, and I think that I never recognized how much that affected, my upbringing and like my personality and the person that I became, because when I saw that happen, it's difficult as a child to process what's happening and to see, okay, what's happening now, my father is being abusive towards my mother, and you don't know how to process all these things. But I think that my natural instinct was to be very protective of my mother, so I think that for all of my life, I've been my mother's protector, because ever since the day I witnessed her being abused, I think that I was always uneasy, and I think it developed sort of some type of resentment towards my father that it created, because I think that even as a child, when I would go to the street, I wouldn't be very relaxed, because I'd be the person that is always coming in between my father and my mother when they were fighting, and obviously being there to protect my mother. And I think it's a conversation that I had with my sister not long ago, because she was like, I think you really don't love our father, or you, and I was like, no. For me, it goes back to whatever it is, that for most of my life, I felt really helpless as to what I could do to protect my mother, And then when I grew up, I ended up, even during the period where I was about to drop out of college, which is what led to it, I ended up being involved in physical altercations with my father, in the process of protecting my mother. And that time I was in my early 20s, and I think that it's something that nobody should ever go through, but I didn't do it because something that's against our African culture. I didn't do it because I wanted to. I did it because it's the predicament that I found myself in, So part of my story is that I had a lot of nightmares, when I was in college, because the semester before I dropped out, was the semester where my father disowned me. I think that our relationship reached a point of, I think it was a complete breakdown, financially, and he was the person that was supporting, but also emotionally as people, because of the fights that we got into. I think that I would dream that my father was fighting me in my sleep, and I didn't understand this, and I think that months would go by and me not getting support and no longer being able to afford food at varsity, no longer being affording to sustain myself, was having a toll on me. And although I had supportive friends, also people that I was reaching out to, when I was hungry, but it was difficult because you got tired of asking people, and got tired of being the person that's always, needing other people's help, and I think that's why it affected my study. I couldn't study anymore because of what I was worrying about. And at that time, my mother was also not at home. My parents were in the process of divorce. So it was a lot of things that were happening that then added to my depression. But I think that childhood trauma had not healed, and that's why I carried it with me. And I think that what it did to me, like for me, it made me not want to talk about my problems as a person. You know, for me, what was happening in the home, my mother was my biggest concern. So when I had something that was wrong or bothering me, I would never talk about it because I felt like I was adding to the problems that already exist in the home, you know. So I felt like I have to be strong for my mother. I have to be a protector. So I developed, you know, this thing of not being able to talk about what bothers me, not only in the home, but with my friends, with anyone. I wouldn't talk, you know, because my default setting is to not talk, you know, and to be strong for other people that are there. And with all the things that I was going through in Boston, no one knew because I didn't talk about it, you know, because I was that strong person. And eventually things build up. And when things do build up, you can't keep it in anymore. You know, it comes in when it comes in. I
It
only
comes in
talked about it
waves.
when I had
It
to.
just like washes over you,
Yes.
and it's so heavy.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it is, you know,
I think what
so
you're saying is something that a lot of people can resonate with. Like, you know, this being strong. Like we wear being strong as like this badge of honor, you know? Like as long as I am strong, as long as I like, you know, don't show any emotion because emotion can be a sign of weakness, as long as I'm able to help other people, as long as I'm able to carry other people, then I am the strong one and I don't need help and I am okay. And you find deep down inside, a lot of people are not okay because like what you're saying, you know, we carry traumas with us. We carry like things that have happened in our past that affect us in our present. And if we don't deal with it, they continue to affect us in our future. So what you're saying is really powerful because a lot of people, I think, sit in a space of thinking that they're strong and finding strength in sort of being able to be there for other people and carry other people, but not taking care of themselves and not taking care of like their mental health and their emotional health and repressing all these emotions and repressing the trauma and the experiences. And then when you're older, or like as you go through life, something triggers that. Like, you know, if you're like with you and your story, you're talking about how you were witnessing all this abuse in your childhood, you find that, like, you know, when you're older, something then triggered that. You know, when you're in varsity and then you're now in a space where you're not able to cope and not able to deal. But a lot of the time we can then go back and sort of identify that as something that originated in our childhood, you know? Like we're looking for quick fixes. It's like, no, I need to, like, I don't know, go to a doctor, get a pill. Like this thing has to sort of like finish because I need to get on with my life. And it's like, no, it's there deep down inside. You repressed it for many years and it's now coming out. So I think like your story is one that I always carry with me. It's one that always resonates with me because like when you talk about, you know, being able to find strength in helping other people, like for me, that is what true strength is because you were able to open yourself up and able to become vulnerable and live in a space of saying, I went through something like this and there are other people who are going through similar things, but you can, on the other end of it, come out of it and you can be so much stronger for it because you were able to face what happened and sort of like, you know, find like your authenticity in that and sort of move forward. So like your story is one that I always carry with me.
Yeah, thank you. And what I can say is that, like, on my reflection, I saw that it's not that there weren't people that were there who cared about me, you know. I just didn't have a way of communicating what it is I was going through, you know. I have a friend, and I have to mention him on this. I hope he does watch it. You know, I value this guy so much. He used to come to my house, and I used to chase people away, you know, when they used to come to visit me. You know, when people found out I was depressed, and they used to come to my house, people who cared about me, my church community. There was this friend of mine from church, but he's a friend for life now in everything. He used to come to my house when I was chasing everyone away, you know, and he came and, you know, he would just come in and sit with me. He didn't need me to talk. He would just come in and he was so patient, you know, until I found the words to speak. You know, he would come in and I couldn't talk, but his patience eventually brought me to a point where, you know, I could open up and I could say, okay, this is what, but it took a lot of him just coming and sitting, you know, and coming and sitting and refusing, you know, to, is a stubborn person, refusing to leave me alone and, you know, and to leave me at the state that I was in. You know, I think that for me, that matters, you know, because I think if it wasn't for that friendship, I wouldn't have made the progress that I've made. I probably wouldn't be here talking to you, because my attempt of pushing people away at that time was because I just didn't want anything to do with life, you know, and I wanted people to be away. But he came in and sat there, you know. So I think that it's important for anyone who has a friend, whoever, I'd say be persistent. You know, obviously you can give people their space, but be persistent in the way you care. And you don't have to always talk, you know, but eventually, if you are patient, people like me, you know, will eventually open up and be able to talk about what it is, you know, yeah, they are going through.
Yeah, no, it's very important because not everybody has the resource to go to therapy.
Yeah.
And sometimes people might not recognize that that is maybe something that they do need, like going to therapy or getting some sort of assistance.
Yeah.
And so to kind of have people around us who support us in that way, it's very important.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was just thinking when you were talking, like I remember I came across something once that kind of spoke about how when other people are going through difficulty, it can be difficult for us to sit with them in the silence, because it also brings up something within us that might sort of like, you know, is a trigger for something else. So a lot of people are very quick to sort of say, no, but you need to talk about something, or like to want to, I don't know, if you're going through difficulty, to console you somehow, and to like, you know, to say something so that to make the uncomfortability go away. But sometimes it's about sitting in the discomfort. It's about sitting in the not knowing, so that we are vulnerable enough and open enough to eventually get to a place where we are able to talk.
No, I wanted to say, I think that for me, when I was going through what it is I was going through, you know, and I think I just want to clarify why it is I didn't want to be around people. And I think maybe this is something that other people can relate to, you know. I think that when you're going through certain mental illness, I think for me with depression, I suffer from depression and a lot of anxiety, social anxiety. For me, I felt like a spectator in my own life, you know, and that's how I experienced depression, you know, because I was also watching what was happening, but you know, as a spectator, you are helpless. You know what a helpless spectator looks like, where you're watching what's happening. It's sort of like an out-of-body experience where you're seeing these things that are happening, and it's like you cannot do anything about it, and you're also in disbelief. So I didn't recognize the person that was experiencing the depression, because I had never met a version of myself that looked like this. You know, I was always happy. I was always confident. I was also, it's almost like I was a spectator looking down on my own life, and this wasn't me. And that's why I didn't want people to meet me and to be around people, because I felt like this is not me. So I don't want you to see me in a version that I feel like is not me. You know, that's not me. That's not who I am. This is not the person that I am right now, you know. And so, you know, I just felt like a spectator most time, like I'm in a bad, very bad dream or horror movie. I can see myself not making my bed. I can see myself not taking a shower for a week. I can see myself self-harming, but it doesn't feel like I'm the one doing these things. You know, I feel like I'm watching these things happen, you know, but I'm helpless in that situation, you know. But most of it, I think, was also caused by isolation, which once I had company made it better, you know, because when I was around other people, I could then self-harm less, you know, or think whatever thoughts less, or you know, be involved in less destructive behaviors less. So yeah, that is one part I just wanted to share about.
Yeah, it's really powerful. So you touched on self-harming, and earlier you spoke about suicide and sort of having sort of like suicidal thoughts. And I wanted to touch on a little bit about that, because we're just coming out of September, which is Suicide Prevention Month. And I came across the stats that were talking about suicide, I think in South Africa, like the 23 suicides that happen per day. and the suicide rate between men and women, like men succumb more to suicidal death than women. So that's a shocking statistics, because I think a lot of people might think it's the other way around, but in actual fact, it's not,
Yeah.
you know? So I wanted to sort of go into the topic of suicide and men and, you know, men's mental health.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. My thoughts are, you know, reflecting back to what I said also, I think that, and this is just my view, and I don't think it's with all women, but I think that women are more expressive beings, you know, and they are more into their emotions and how they're feeling, you know? And when you get around, if you're a woman and you're around your other friends that are women, you know, you are able to talk about feelings and how you feel and the things that are bothering you. I think it's different for me, even with my closest friends. You know, talking about how we feel and what we're going through was never something that was part of the conversation, you know. We never really talk about that, you know. I think that even as a Black man, we know that men don't cry, you know. I think I can count the number of times I've seen my father cry, and it's always, it's not, that's a foreign image, you know, to see your father. If you see your father crying, you know that there's something wrong or anything. I have family relatives, my uncles, that I've never seen cry in my life, or be it any amount of funerals we've been to. That's just foreign, you know. And for me, being Zulu, that's just not something we do. A man is supposed to be strong, you know. A man, there's an image for a man that's set out for him, you know, that a man doesn't struggle. Even when you are failing to make ends meet, as a man, you must stand strong. That is a mark and a test of your character as a man, you know. So I think that the reason why suicide is so bad among men is that it's what we talked about. Men bottle up, and once it happens, when a man is determined to take his own life, he takes his life, you know. And when he's come to that decision, it's a drastic one that he takes, and he's never moving back, you know. And I think the other thing might be because for men, it's better to, you know, to die, I guess, than to live in dishonor, or, you know, or to have let down your family and things like that. So I think that we carry a lot of things, you know, as men, that yeah, it becomes difficult, you know. Some men cannot live knowing that they are not providers, you know, because that's part of our trade. So if I lose my job, then, you know, it's over. And so I think that the way in which men approach, you know, mental illness, in which most of them don't really deal with it, you know, it's very drastic, you know, and the steps that they take to deal with it, or when they've made up their minds that they're gonna end their lives, they really go for the worst. You know, we've seen what happened. You know, they're really shooting of themselves and their families. You know, it's really yeah, it's really different. So from my experience, that's what I think it is.
Even with like what you're saying now, like, you know, this all these you'll hear these stories about men who something would happen, and like, you know, it's almost like it's the final straw that broke the camel's back, and somebody would kill, like would maybe shoot themselves and shoot the wife and the kids, and like, you know, take everybody out. And a lot of the time people would think, oh my goodness, this person is heartless, how can they do something like this? And the question that I always ask is, how much suffering was there for this person to get to this place? Because it's not something that you come to very lightly. And I remembered also, as you were talking, I was once watching a documentary, and they were talking about suicide amongst men, and I think it was in Kenya, and it was this village, and the suicide rate among men was very, very high. And it was like a small village, and they were trying to understand why. And it's because of the economic impact that these men were facing. They were losing jobs, and they weren't able to provide for their families. So rather than like, you know, talk to somebody or sort of face the problem, they had these beliefs, like what you're talking about, you know, that a man is a person who's supposed to be a certain way, he's supposed to be able to provide for the family. And if you're not able to do that, I'd rather than, like, you know, take my life because I can't live as somebody who's not able to live up to this idea of what a man is.
Mm.
And it kind of gets me to think about the beliefs that we hold. Like, you know, we have like these belief systems, and not just sort of like in a religious way, but in the way that we structure and live our lives. And a lot of the time, it's things that we take on from maybe our parents, or as we're younger, like, you know, it could be teachers at school, like figures in our lives that have an impact on our lives, and, you know, teach us that when you are, like what you said, boys don't cry. That's something that like boys adopt, and like, you know, girls would also be taught it, or like are raised in a particular way, according to particular gender norms. And those are belief systems that we take on and that we hold, you know, and we don't really recognize that, because we take them on and it feels like it's ours. It feels like it's our voice. Like, you know, this is the person that I am because I believe this thing. And a lot of the time it's like, but if you start to unpack, it's like, you don't have to live according to that belief system, because it's not something that is healthy for you. You know, if you believe in things that are like that, like men have to behave a particular way, and then that is detrimental to your mental health, and it eventually leads you to a place where you succumb to suicide. That is so painful, and I think it's not a conversation we're having enough.
Yeah, and I think that for me, it starts from childhood. You know, I think with boys, because I've seen a lot of what's happening now on social media. You know, and people who are raising their boys talking about how, you know, I think it also stems with what's happening with gender-based violence in South Africa. People are talking about, you know, the relation towards mental health and gender-based violence. How can these killings that we are seeing, you know, how can these men be capable of doing such things, you know? And it stems what kind of the generation of men that we're raising for the next generation in South Africa in the next 30, 50 years. Are we going to be seeing the same thing? Are we going to continue to see men that are abusing women, killing women? Are we going to continue to see this violence, or are we going to change the trend? And where does mental health fall in all of this? And I think for me, it falls in how we're raising boys, you know, because I think for me, when we're growing up as boys as well, you know, there are terms that they use for you. You know, if you cry as a boy, or if you hurt yourself, then you're not supposed to cry, and you're not supposed to, if your heart is broken, you're supposed to stand, and you're supposed to fight, you know, and you don't always get that affection, you know. Yeah, it's hard, you know, growing up as a boy. And I think that's where we try to change it, and to give boys love. And I'm not saying let us change, because I don't want to be crucified by my gender. So I'm not saying let us completely
like do away with everything. No, bye.
Yeah, you know, because a man still has to be a man, but I think that we can redefine it in some forms and say it's okay to do certain things because they're hurting us right now. You know, it's okay for us to be aware that we do have mental health. It's okay for us to show some type of emotion, even if we're showing it behind closed doors or whatever. It's okay for us to recognize what it is. And I think that the way in which we're raising young boys right now should change. We should raise them with affection. We should raise them as people who are aware, you know, emotionally aware, and who know how to deal with what it is. You know, I think that even with young boys, everything that any quarrel that you were faced with, you had to solve it by fighting someone or whatever. You know, you had to fight. You had to get into a fight. To
show that you're strong, right?
Yeah. There was no talking. And if you do certain things, you know, they'll call you names. You know, they're derogatory names. Like, and those are the things that we grow up realizing that no, I'm still living up to those standards. You know, that was said, and you realize that you're not living according to what you know to be true, but you're living according to what society has said is the reality, and what your friends have said is the reality. And that's why I think that as a person, even as a man, you need to break away from the norm and from what other people are saying, and recognize and kind of ask yourself, what do I really believe? You know, besides what society says, what do I believe? And if you live according to that truth, I think your life will be much better, because that's what I had to do for myself and realize, what do I really believe about this? What's the reality? Because that's exactly why I want to be in this space, because I want to create a voice for other Black men to also open up, you know, and men of all races to also come out and speak about this thing and normalize it and say, no, it's okay for us to, tackle it head on.
Yeah, because I think it's important, like, what you're saying. And we can't get in a space as a society where only half of us come to the party to tackle a problem that we all have. Like, someone like these social problems that we're experiencing, like what you were talking about, gender-based violence and all those things, it involves both genders, so both men and women have to come to the party, because if we only have a one-sided conversation, we're never going to be able to get to a place where we come up with solutions that really both parties can adopt and sort of see and like as their own and own up to. So it is really important what you're saying, that it like we have to raise up that platform for the male voice to come out in mental health, so that we also have a better understanding of what's going on there, so that we can come up with solutions and our own solutions, rather than being told that, oh, you have a mental health problem, this is what you have to do. When you are part of the conversation, when you're part of what is happening, you can also be part of the solution and come up with ways that sort of make sense to you.
I didn't recognize it when I started the work I was doing in mental health activism. I didn't start it like, oh, I'm a Black man, so I can speak about, like, it's when I started talking about it. It wasn't even a thing like that. It's only other people that made me realize, it's only, like you and other people are like, oh, wow, you're a Black man, that's opening. I'm like, oh, so I am a Black man. So I didn't know. I was just,
you were like, this is me, this is my experience.
This is me. Exactly. And I was talking about it. And they're like, no, actually, you're one of the few Black men who are talking about these things. And now I realized I think that all of us have an audience and the people that we speak to, wherever we are. I think that's why there'll always be a space for you in whatever area that you're doing. And I think not even in mental health, in whatever you're doing, whether you're singing or whatever you are doing in life, I think that you'll always speak to certain people. I think that I was brought in to speak to a certain group of people, that if I never went through what I went through, or if I'm not speaking about mental health, those people would not have known about mental health. They wouldn't have created that. I can speak and say confidently, especially among my circle, among my closest friends, among my family, there's been so much awareness that I've done around those people, because they've been around me, that it's been such a conversation among our circles, among our areas, it's opened so much because I decided the influence that I have and the people that I know that I can speak to them. I think that because I did that, those people were able to get the message. And there are places that you cannot reach. I think a friend of mine reached out to me a couple of weeks back. He needed someone to counsel some couple, and he needed someone who speaks in vernacular, and who's going to counsel them. And I thought to myself, how important would it be, to even get people who speak in different languages, who speak in our languages to translate. Like I said, we don't even have the vocabulary of some of mental health. Most of what we have in mental health, we don't have that vocabulary in our languages, and how important it is if we can find people who talk about it in our very language. It would be so amazing to have that, to be able to give counseling to people in their own language, not to have to use psychology terminology that is big for people who come from villages to understand, because those people still need to get the message. Those people still need to get the services, and so it's very important that everyone know that, they are needed, and I know I might not be big or whatever, but I'm needed to the people that I talk to and that get my message every day. Yeah.
No, that is very important. I remember a while ago, I used to ask myself the question, what about the language of mental health? Because when you think about mental health, especially sort of in Black society, we like, English is not ours. We don't own it, right? So what is the word that we then use if you're Zulu to say, you're depressed or anxiety and like my mother's Zulu as well. And I went like on a little mission. I was like, right, I am going to ask people. I was like, if we had to say depression in Zulu, what would you say? And like, I looked it up, I went online, I was looking up dictionaries and like, we're trying to find words. And the thing about it is we don't have that vocabulary. So how are we able to communicate in a way that makes sense to somebody who then will be able to take this on to say, okay, so this is something that I can sort of trust and believe because it makes sense in my life, rather than speaking in a language that they don't understand, because they're not going to be able to take that on. You know, so when you talk about mental health in Black society, that's some of the things that we need to really address to sort of say, how do we, you know, tackle that issue? What needs to happen? Do we need to maybe, like, you know, come up with our own different language of how we describe it? Because that's also where stigma is, right? So somebody might be like, I'm not depressed. And it's like, okay, but all the signs are there, or like what you're saying, all the things that you're saying is that, but because they understand depression to be a particular way, so it attaches stigma to it. But if you then maybe changed it up and maybe used a different word and maybe used a word that they understood in their sort of mother tongue, it might be something that they're willing to sort of like accept a little bit more, you know? So
I think, I think language is very important. You know, I think that language was a big part of my healing. I think that being able to, because like I said, I didn't know what it is I was experiencing and what is this that was going on with me, you know, until I found that there was such a thing as depression, you know, and being able to define what it is you're going through, you know, at least it gives you some sanity, you know, to say, okay, no, this is not some weird thing, you know, this is not witchcraft, or this is not madness. This is actually a medical condition that I'm going through that can, you know, that I can receive treatment for and so forth. So that's why I believe in language so much. You know, language is so important, you know, and I think that it will be a big part of our healing as a Black, you know, as a Black community. And one thing I forgot to say that I need to say on what we're talking about Black men and mental health, you know, I think that I saw something that was so amazing, or it was eye-opening, man, where it said that the phrase "men don't cry" has created monsters, you know, and I think that I found that to be so true. It has created monsters, and I think that mental illness does create monsters if it's untreated, you know. I think that most people who are causing, hey, but this is gonna, I don't know how this is gonna sound, but I think that
are you about to be controversial?
I think a little bit. I don't know. You let me know if this sounds controversial to you or not. But most people who are, let's say, when it comes to being abusive or who are causing a havoc in the workplace or in the community, are many people who are going around with untreated mental illness, you know. And I can think about a lot of people from workplaces I've been in, spaces I've been, are people who have left their mental illness untreated. And when you do leave it untreated, you know, you can become a monster. We can see a person, you know, harming another person or killing another person, you know, because of that. So it's a lot. I think that that's just the point I want to say about that, is that that's why it's so important. I mean,
to get it's a valid point to make, right? Because like what I was saying about mental health being part of like our overall health, and like, you know, we need to sort of like make that an important aspect of like how we take care of ourselves. So what you're saying is really important, because when we aren't able to recognize what is hurting us, like, you know, it makes me think of this quote where it says, when you don't heal from what you've been through, you will bleed on people that never hurt you, you know? So there's something that's going on there that is impacting you, that is impacting your mental health, that is causing you to become a particular way and not being able to cope. And you find that you then end up in a situation where, because you're in so much distress and you're unable to cope, that you hurt the people around you, you know? So this can sort of like vary in extremes. Like it could be somebody who then sort of like withdraws and is isolated, and the people around you are trying to sort of like, you know, be there for you and are like, oh, but like what's going on with this guy? And that in itself is hurtful when somebody withdraws, like somebody you love, and all of a sudden they withdraw, but it's because they're hurting and they're going through something. And then you have like, you know, another extreme on the opposite side of the scale where somebody ends up like, you know, can end up in a situation where they become so unwell that they hurt people. I mean, I remember when I was working in mental health in the UK, I worked in secure settings where a lot of people, because of their mental health difficulties and their mental illness, and, you know, because they were so unwell, they ended up committing crimes. And some of it was crimes against other people because they got to a place where they were so unwell. And when somebody starts to become better and, you know, they sort of like feel more like themselves, when they have to face up to some of the things that they had done in a state of being outside of themselves, like that thing you were talking about, sort of like having an outer body experience, it is so difficult to reconcile those two, to come together and be like, I am that person who did this thing. But it's because you were in a place where you were not well and you weren't yourself. And it's so painful to see that. And I think that's part of the drive for why I do what I do, because I'm just like, I don't want to see that kind of pain, like, you know, somebody going through that kind of pain, to sort of say, when I was unwell, I did this thing. And now that I'm okay, it's almost like I have to, you know, feel guilty about it for the rest of my life. It's like, no, we can live in a place where we're able to drive sort of like our wellness journey, so that we don't get to that place where we're in so much distress and we hurt people around us, you know. So that's very important what you're saying. So even though you feel it's controversial, and I think, some people might sort of like look at it that way and be like, what's Zamu saying? But it's an important point to make, because it's only when we start having these difficult conversations to point out, like, you know, that like things that make us uncomfortable, that we start to get into a space of change.
Yeah, I think that mental illness can make you very bitter. I remember even when I was depressed, you know, and, you know, I was not doing well at school because of it. You know, I had thoughts of burning the whole school. I wanted the whole school to burn. I wanted to burn the school because of what I was going through. I wanted to set everything alight, on fire, you know, and because of what I was going through. But I think that that's part of what, you know, a mental illness was doing to me. And I think that that's not the person that I am. But I want to pose a question.
Pain internally, so you want to express it externally, you know. But the only way you can deal with this internal pain is to turn inwards into yourself and sort of like work on yourself and sort of start to unpack those things.
Yeah, I want to pose a question. You know, since you asked me about my story, you know, and my journey with mental illness and what I want to know, if we ever really know, because this is something I've been asking myself and struggling with myself. Do we ever really know what really caused it? You know, because I think that I can point to things that I think contributed to it. You know, but you know, as the years go by and as I continue to reflect, there's so many things that come out that make me, you know, question whether I'm certain about what it is. You know, I think even to this day, because I mentioned it was childhood trauma that contributed to it, and some of the other things. And even there, you know, I think my mother to this day feels like I blame her for what happened, you know, because or my father thinks I blame, and I don't blame them for anything. I don't blame, and I don't put my mental illness to someone else to say, look, if you didn't do this, this wouldn't have happened. You know, I think that in any case, depression or mental illness could have happened to me in any form. It could have been anything that could have happened, you know, that could have. So I don't really blame it on anyone. I don't blame it on my father. I don't say you were abusive and hence now today I have mental illness, or you, mom, you decided not to leave an abusive and toxic marriage, and that's why I'm here today, you know. And some of it is even me even taking accountability of some of the things I did, you know, that contributed towards me being mentally unwell, you know, because there are things I could have done too. So my main thing, you know, and I'm posing this so that other people who are going through mental illness, a lot of people don't know why, you know. You sit with people and you ask them why, and they don't know. And I think that it's okay not to know, because even though I can point to certain things, I don't have a certainty of what it is. I'm also learning about my journey and saying, okay, is it this? Is it that? There's so many factors, you know. I think that it's so many things, even to this day, when I'm called to speak about what causes depression? You know, I
Yeah.
shiver a bit, you know, because I can't give you conclusive. Everyone is different, and everyone's life is different.
And
And
you
for you
can
to
only
come
speak for your own story, right? And where it comes from
exactly,
for you. So what, like somebody else
you
could
know,
go through the exact same experience that you went through and
yeah,
like not have the same sort of mental health difficulty and like,
yeah.
so it's not a one size fits all kind of thing.
No, it's not.
So
It's not.
like when I think about it, like I think about a little bit about like my own story. Like, I've been somebody who I've worked in mental health settings, like, like I just mentioned now, I've worked in mental health in the UK. And I've worked with like so many different people. And my mother was a psychiatric nurse for over 40 years. And that's the thing that triggered my interest to sort of go into psychology and ask the question, why is it that we behave the way that we behave? And then that led me down, the path of like working in mental health. And I think even when working, I remember thinking, because you come across so many people who are so unwell and who are like in psychiatric hospitals and needing so much care, that you sort of like live in this weird sort of space of, okay, so they're unwell and it's a mental health issue, so clearly I'm fine. Like the only time you have a problem is when you are unwell and you are like in a psychiatric hospital. But then I started asking myself the question, how true is that? And it's only through sort of like looking at my own life and like going through my own difficulty and sort of like I remember I always talk about this one, like motherhood was a big one for me. Like, it was a big change, it was a big chapter. And I remember like being in a situation where I was depressed, and like I remember asking myself, just because I'm not going to a doctor and like, somebody saying this is a diagnosis of, does that mean that I don't have depression? And I was like, but I'm sitting here and I'm like holding my baby and I'm like curled up in a corner and I'm crying every night and I feel out of control and I don't know what's going on with me and I'm isolating and I don't want to talk to anyone and I feel so hopeless and so helpless. So what does that mean, So if I then don't sort of look at myself and sort of like approach it in that way, I'm not then able to hold out a hand and say, I am in a place where I need help, So it's an interesting question, I think, that you're asking, because when you look at it from like a psychology perspective, people will talk about nature and nurture. Some people might say it's genetics. And when it comes to mental illness and mental health difficulties, because there's so many different illnesses, like we can talk about depression and anxiety, bipolar, we can talk about like, they said sort of like more in a mood disorder type thing. We can talk about psychosis, things like schizophrenia, and a whole array of like different difficulties that people experience. And there's some evidence that says some of it is inherited or can be inherited. And then some of it, there's evidence that says some of it is not. So it's very difficult to then say. So I've always taken the approach that it could be a combination of both. It could be one or the other. It could be a mixture of anything. Like we genuinely don't know, because we don't have a tool that lets us go into the brain to sort of say, right, let's map out Zamokuhle's depression. It started here and then and then over 20 years, this is what we get, and these are your results. So it's interesting to sort of learn about these things and to know, and it can be a really good way to sort of help people and get to a place where you can map out their recovery journey. But I think we shouldn't be too fixated on where it comes from, because sometimes living too much in the past doesn't really help. Like, yes, we can sort of say, okay, fine, maybe it comes from childhood trauma. And once we know that, you can start the healing and the work, and to sort of say, okay, so how do I then get to a place where I work on this and I start my healing journey? But it's not always like, that sort of like straight cut. And like when people don't sort of are able to sort of like map out that journey for themselves, what does that mean then? Does it mean that you can't have good mental health? Does it mean you can't get to a place where you are okay? No, you can, So I think sometimes it's good knowledge to have. It's good. It's a good basis. It's very interesting. It's informative, but we shouldn't be so, we shouldn't hold on to it so much that it becomes debilitating and it doesn't allow us to move forward.
And I say this for someone who is going through what I was going through, you know, someone who's experiencing suicidal ideation at the moment, someone who's feeling suicidal, you know. I want them to know that you can live through those moments. And I think that you should embrace the moments where you don't feel okay as much as you embrace the moments where you are happy and where you, I think that sometimes for me, even back then, it was a fear of experiencing what it was that I was experiencing, you know. I think I recently had sort of a mental breakdown, you know, and that was caused by being overwhelmed because of work, overextending myself among different things, you know, with work, with community projects, you know, and yeah, the way I treated this mental health breakdown, and I did have some suicidal thoughts, but I think the way I handled it reminded me of back then, you know, when I was suicidal and I attempted suicide. But the way I handled it was much different, you know, because this time I allowed myself to experience what I was experiencing. You know, I disengaged, I took time away, but I allowed myself to feel what I was feeling and to think what I was thinking without feeling the need to act on it. You know, I allowed myself to recognize that, okay, I am thinking about ending my life right now and I don't want to be alive right now, but I'm really not going to act on that because I know that right now I'm not okay, you know. And I was able to reach out to people that were closest to me, but mostly I took time away from everything to deal. Whereas back then, my response was to self-harm and my response was to act on those thoughts that I had of suicide, you know. So I think that if someone is experiencing that, for me, what I'd say to them is that allow yourself to experience everything, you know, because I think that a week after that happened, my life was so great. Like it was a complete opposite. When I look at, you know, the fun I had during this heritage weekend, you know, and this mental breakdown was not far away from that. I was like, look at how much a turnaround my life has taken, you know, because I didn't decide that, okay, because I was experiencing what I was experiencing, I have to, you know, like kill myself right now. So I'm saying for me, I allow myself to experience everything, you know, even the times where mentally I'm at my worst, but I allow myself to experience that because I think that it's part of the human experience, you know. And if we deprive ourselves of that part, you know, then it's our belief that that shouldn't exist that makes us feel as if that is what we're experiencing, then we have to die or kill ourselves. So I think that that's how my approach has been different when it's come to these things. And that's the kind of awareness I want to bring to people.
And it's part of like the healing journey, right? It's part of.
What's this?
A stick, a small one into my finger.
Oh.
Let it out.
I can't. Ask Jalen. What's this?
Okay. I finished it by grade.
Okay. I'm still busy in the meeting. Look, just say hi, but you won't see. No, this is someone I work with.
Hello. Hi.
I'm still busy. I'll come now. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. So I was just saying that what you were saying right then is so important because it's part of the healing journey. You know, it's when you're healing, you are able to sort of look at, in the past, this is how I used to respond to a similar situation. But now that I am on a journey of awareness and a journey of healing, I now respond differently. And it reminds me of something that I was talking about on my Facebook post. And I was talking about how we need to become the observer of our thoughts, you know, because your thoughts are not you. Like sometimes you think things and it's like, it feels like because it's coming from you, that is you. But it's like, no, that is your response to a situation, to something that is happening in that particular moment. So when you're able to detach yourself from that thought, to sort of observe it and acknowledge it, allow it to be what the thought is, you know, without trying to change it, without trying to sort of manipulate it, without trying to suppress it and push it down and make it something else. Acknowledge it because it's coming from a place inside of you that is real, right? So So acknowledge the thought, sit with it, be with it, and allow it to sort of like run out of fuel and then let go. Because I think it's when we try to change things and when we try to sort of like be in a space where we're like, no, but like I can't be thinking these things and suppressing them. They then come out later on and we don't even know or can't even acknowledge where they come from. And we don't even know that it stems from that original thought because we've just put so many other layers on top, and it can be so detrimental to our mental health.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. I think that, and what I can add to what you said is acceptance is a very big part of it. You know, I think I saw something that says that, you know, each of us reaches a place in our life where, you know, there are things that we experience that there are things that we experience in life and that we realize that there's no more going forward, and sometimes there's no more going back. Whatever has happened, you know, and we are faced with the choice of what to do in that moment. And choosing acceptance in that moment, you know, I think that does amazing things for us. I think that for me, my life has been a constant pursuit of accepting, you know, every day wherever I find, you know, sometimes you wake up and you're not where you want to be in life, or you don't like what it is, but acceptance is something that you have to choose, you know, daily, you know, and say, I need to accept what it is. Because once I accept that, okay, this is happening, I have to accept that I have a mental illness. You know, people think it just came natural for me to accept that, oh, I had depression. I think part of me starting Dark Cloud Above Me, you know, was about me owning my story, you know. And I was so ashamed about people saying that, you know, I have depression, you know, or he's depressed, or he has mental illness, that it was difficult for me to, that's why I isolated myself, because I thought that every time people would see me, they would see me and say, this is the guy that has depression or whatever. But I say, what if I own my story? What if I took it from them? What if I was the one that said, I do have depression? Then you have nothing else to say, you understand?
Yeah,
because
you
that was
own
the
your
thing
own
that,
narrative.
yeah, because that was the most painful thing someone could have said, you know, to cause me pain. But when I decided that I'm going to open up, you know, like it wasn't easy for me to accept that I'm a college dropout, you know, and that I'm depressed. Those were hard things for me to even think about, let alone talk about, you know. But when I decided that I'm going to start the organization and I'm going to be the one that said, hi, my name is Zamokuhle Masondo and I'm a college dropout and I'm depressed, people would be so shocked that what can they say from then on to kind of hurt me or whatever. So I think that my whole journey has been about owning my own story, you know, and I think that what Dark Cloud Above Me allows me, you know, to do that. You know, I've accepted, and after accepting, I own my story.
It has dawned on me, I think, when I look at mental health awareness in the South African landscape, that there isn't enough ownership in communities about mental health, about the stories, about, you know, anything that has to do with anything in that space. Like there isn't enough of people sort of like taking that on board and sort of like saying, I am going to be empowered and do something about this, you know? So I think that is very important. That's something I wanted to sort of speak about and highlight, because not everybody is able to get to a psychologist. Like, you know, when you're like, oh, mental health difficulty, and they're like, oh, get to a psychologist. And like, not everybody is able to get to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And not everybody is so unwell that they need to go to a psychiatric hospital for an admission. Like sometimes you live in the middle where you kind of feel like I'm not okay, but at the same time, I'm not so extreme that I need this kind of intervention, but like I am here and I am not okay. And I think highlighting the role that activism plays, like with you know, things like organizations like Dark Cloud Above Me, is so important, because that's where we say, this is the place you can go to. This is where you can find your tribe, your community, where people can support you, to say, when you're not okay, that is okay. We've been there before and we are here and we can help you, you know?
Yeah, I think that it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to be able to open up and talk about your story, you know? I think that, but I think that you are other people's voice. I think it comes back to what I was talking about when I said that we all speak to a certain, I am you know, I was thinking about even the name Darker Above Me when I was thinking about, should I change it to something that's nicer? Should I, you know, but I was like, no, I love this name because it speaks to, it's a trigger, number one, you know.
Mm.
And when I say Dark Cloud Above Me, someone who's been depressed can say me too, you know. And so when I share my story, I share it so somebody can say, you know what, me too, you know, I've gone through that. And that's the reason why I try to document other people's stories who've gone through the same thing, because I am someone else's voice, someone who cannot speak or even find the words to describe, you know, what they're going through. They can take my story, they can take my words, you know, and say, if you don't understand, or some people can even direct people to this video that we're busy with now that can say, if you want to understand me better, just look at this video or this guy's story. It relates a bit to what it is that I went through. And I think that that's what it's about. You know, I found my story through other people as well, through the other people's stories that I've been exposed to in my time since I've been in mental health. I found people, you know, who've been able to relate to what it is I went through what they spoke about, you know, and I was like, yes, that's exactly what I was trying to express. That's exactly what I was trying to talk about, and that is exactly what it is that I went through. And I think that that's part of why it's so important to open up and talk about your story.
Yeah, because we all have a story, and there's so many different stories, you know. So there's a lot that can be done, a lot of healing that can start from somebody just speaking those words and somebody resonating with those words and sort of like, you know, finding strength in them and kind of going, oh wow, so I'm not the only one. Like, it's so important to sort of recognize that you are not the only one, because a lot of the time in these spaces with mental health difficulty, we feel so alone, so isolated. We feel like we are the only ones. So one other thing that I wanted to touch on quickly was mental health and religion, or mental health in Black society and religion. Because I remember having a conversation with somebody, and they said that they were talking to the pastor, and they were talking about how, you know, they felt so hopeless in their life and helpless, and like all these things were overwhelming, and they just didn't feel like they can go on. So, you know, it's almost like very sort of like in that sort of space of describing almost sort of depressive sort of symptoms, right? And their pastor then said something like, oh, it seems like the demon of depression has got you, so we need to pray for you. And this person was then talking to me sort of saying, but I didn't feel like that was the response that I needed, because I felt like I was really in distress, and I felt I needed help, and I didn't know who else to turn to. And it kind of made me start to think about mental health difficulty in Black society in regards to religion, you know. And I know that like your story is entrenched in religion as well.
Yeah, I think that, you know, for me, I think that number one, like I said, I was a theology student, you know, when I was depressed, you know. So I was studying to become a pastor, and I was, you know, for me, I was a very religious person back then, you know, and I think that being depressed posed a lot of questions to me about my spirituality, you know, and about my relationship with God. It challenged me, even for the people around me. I think it's a situation where people think that maybe there's something that you might have done, or you have some hidden sins in your life that have caused you to go through what it is that you are going through. So I think that it was a very difficult thing. And I think that when you talk about religion, mental health and religion in the Black community, you begin to see that our understanding of depression and mental illness is sometimes linked to our religious beliefs. You know, I think we link mental illness to demon possession. You know, we link it to all of these other things that it isn't. You know, like there's a lot of work to be done within the religious space.
Like mental illness is not something that you like willingly bring onto yourself. Like, you know, like we all have mental health, and then sometimes things happen in your life, and then you get to a place where you are ill and you're not
Yeah.
okay. So it's not something that you sort of like just bring onto yourself because you because of a belief system or because you don't have enough faith. So Zamo, thank you so much for the conversation that we've had today. It was so empowering, so enlightening. And there's so many things that you said, and I just wanted to continue on and on and on and on and on. But at some point the conversation has to end. And I think this is the beginning of so many more. And thank you so much for your time.
I'd say thank you very much for having me on this conversation. It's been a pleasure. I had a good time talking about all these things, and I hope that what we're doing does touch other people. Yeah, we are on your socials. We are at Dark Cloud Above Me 6 on Instagram, Dark Cloud Above Me on Facebook. We have a Facebook group and we have a Facebook page, and we are Dark Cloud Above Me on Twitter, and if you would like to join our online community, our mental health support group on WhatsApp, you can then contact us on 072-728-4869 and request to join our WhatsApp group, and we will add you.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.